All right, so today we're going to talk about why you should care how big your nuts are. So one of the more known and common effects of going on TRT, testosterone replacement therapy, taking exogenous testosterone, or running full-on PED cycles, steroid cycles, one of the more common side effects is testicular atrophy. Your balls shrinking, you losing size of your testicles. This happens in many, many men, but it also happens to varying degrees. You know, some guys experience very little to any testicular atrophy, whereas other guys literally can, frankly, almost lose their testicles to where they'll almost shrink up and actually retract up into the body, and it actually can be quite painful. So even though this is one of the more commonly known side effects, most men just frankly don't care. It's more of a cosmetic issue in most people's minds, and this is how it's been treated for the last several decades of steroid users and those on testosterone replacement therapy. Now, lots of studies are coming out and lots of things are showing that you should actually care how big your balls are. Now, the reality is I'm not talking about, the ball size comparative to other men. Everyone's born kind of with different testicular size. I'm talking about compared to where you were or are naturally. So, comparing, how big your balls were at their biggest before you ever touched an exogenous hormone, you should care, how much size you actually lose. I've dealt with many men that frankly have lost very little size at all. This has fortunately been something that, even though I did not do the right things, and I'm going to tell you what to do to do the right way of going about this in just a bit. Even though I didn't do that for years, I frankly kept the majority of my size, maybe a little bit of atrophy, but nothing concerning. I have experienced men though that literally they've gone from having walnut-sized nuts to literally little paintballs. And there's reports of men that while they're having sex, they'll literally have their balls be so small that they'll retract up into their body, and it can be extremely, extremely painful. Even more so than this though, there's issues that come about if you allow atrophy to happen. Most men in this space, going on testosterone replacement therapy or running steroid cycles, just kind of accept that it's a cosmetic issue. Rich Piana talked about how, if you lose the size of your balls, it makes your dick look bigger.
The higher your balls are, the bigger your fucking dick looks.
This is true, but even though that might be a cosmetic advantage or disadvantage to you, there's actually other health effects that come along with this, and there's a right way of going about doing this. So first off, compound selection. Running testosterone, you're going to go ahead and shut off your natural production, and this is where over time the balls can atrophy. If you run harsh compounds, something such as tren, especially tren, something even like DECA can actually cause atrophy to happen at a much greater and much faster rate. That's why, many, many people, including myself, recommend staying away from harsh compounds like these. But what we're going to talk about today is how losing your nuts and not caring how big your nuts are and losing size can actually hurt you in many regards. So first off is fertility. The more you have testicular atrophy, usually this is going to impair fertility. Now, there's many studies showing out there that even after years and years and years of prolonged exogenous hormone use, you can regain fertility, at least the fertility amount you were, while you were natural. I have seen that while that usually is the case, it can take a long, long, long time to regain even a decent level of fertility markers, depending on how much atrophy you have. So typically, the more amount of atrophy you have, the more your nuts have shrunk over time, the harder it is going to be to regain your fertility markers. So if you just let your balls kind of go into Netherlands and you have any bit of fertility desires in the future, this is not helping, one, your odds of getting pregnant, and then B, it's going to make the process a lot longer and harder potentially when you get to that. Two, if you do what I'm going to recommend at in just a second, if you retain your testicular size, a lot of times the testicular size can actually be related to the health of the libido itself. So Even if you're running all these exogenous hormones, if you allow your balls to just shrink up and shrivel up and die, it's not going to give you as much of a healthy libido as if you do what's going to be recommended in just a second. So the third one, and this is a big one that's not talked about very often, and it's testicular fibrosis. If you let your balls just shrink up and essentially, die and atrophy over time, you can actually have testicular fibrosis. They've done autopsies on bodybuilders, and they found testicular fibrosis in several bodybuilders who have passed. This is not something you want if you are trying to be as healthy as possible, be as fertile as possible, and frankly, just maintain health and longevity throughout life. And we're going to talk in several other videos about, how this will relate to cascade events over time, but there are negative effects that come about if you just let your testicles completely atrophy. So the recommendation here, this is something that used to be optional back in the day, but it's highly, highly, highly recommended amongst the smart people doing this now, is use HCG along with your testosterone replacement therapy, or even if you're running cycles, you should have HCG in place. This should be a non-negotiable. One, this is going to keep your balls very, very ample. They're gonna, keep them, basically as big as they were while you're natural. B, it's going to keep you fertile, or at least more fertile. And C, it's going to also help your libido be much healthier and virile as well. So HCG in place is going to protect you against a lot of testicular atrophy, and this is no longer just a cosmetic issue of, I don't care if my balls shrink up. There's health implications that come about if you let that happen. So it's recommended to use HCG along with exogenous hormone use. So the bare minimum I would recommend would be 250 IUs every other day. I personally use 300 IUs every other day. And the reason being is there's been studies that have shown that 250 IUs every other day still has I believe it's a 7% decrease in intratesticular testosterone, meaning you're still shutting yourself down just slightly from an intratesticular testosterone perspective. If you go over 300, you go to 500 IUs every other day, you have an increase, I believe, of 26%. So this is kind of overkill. So for most guys out there running TRT, 300 IUs every other day is going to be kind of the sweet spot. This is going to keep your intratesticular testosterone at a really, really healthy level, allow you to retain your testicular size, retain fertility, retain your libido, and it's going to protect you against, just letting your balls atrophy over time to where you could eventually potentially get testicular fibrosis, which is definitely not good. Now, if you do what I've done, I went through many years competing as a pro bodybuilder, not using HCG. I then blasted HCG to kind of get everything turning back on. I really, really, really lowered I had first off been on TRT alone with no other exogenous hormones. And I had lowered my TRT down to a relatively low amount, right about 100 milligrams per week. And then I blasted HCG, got everything going again. And within literally 2 to 3 weeks, I regained all of my testicular size back. Libido was through the roof. And then I'll be rechecking my fertility markers here in about a month or so and comparing that to my last semen analysis and confirming what I believe to be true. And that's regaining some fertility markers. So you can go ahead and kind of run a heavier dose of HCG in the beginning to kind of get things going, but that might not even be necessary. You might just be able to go ahead and add in a little bit of HCG, and it'll kind of regain everything. Now, this also depends on how much have you lost. I've dealt with guys that they literally tell me that they've shriveled up to literally like a marble size. If you're at that level, and that's pretty extreme, if you're at that level, you're probably going to need a much heavier amount of HCG. The other thing I didn't talk about in this is if you are ever considering coming off of PEDs completely, you're ever considering PCTing off of TRT and wanting to regain natural function, a big, big, big indicator of this is your testicular size, how much atrophy you've lost. If you've retained all of your testicular size, you have much better odds of recovering your natural function. If you have allowed yourself to atrophy quite a bit, this is going to really hurt your odds of having a really solid recovery back to solid natural levels. So, if this is ever something you're considering in the future, you really should consider running ACG along with your TRT, and frankly, especially your cycles if you are going that route. So, this kind of gives you the option in the future to, if you had to come off to regain fertility markers. Some guys aren't able to conceive on TRT and need to have a period of time where they're off exogenous hormones or doing ACG monotherapy. If that's the case, then, if you had ACG in place, it's going to kind of give you that much better chance and frankly allow your life to be better than if you're coming from a place where you're really atrophied. So whole point of this video is ACG should be a non-negotiable if you're running TRT, if you are running steroid cycles. If you just do not care at all about fertility, you're never going to PCT off, then you could kind of, run the risk of, I really don't care how small my balls get. I don't care if I run the small risk, because it really isn't a big risk, but the small risk of testicular fibrosis. But if any one of these are concerns, or you believe in the future it'll be a concern, having a little bit of ACG in your protocol will make your life way easier in the future. So I'll be doing deep dives and talking heavily about ACG in the future. This is something that I didn't employ until many months ago now, but I went years and years without it. And if I could go back in time and coach my younger self, I would have made sure I had ACG in place. So I'm trying to save you guys some potential headache later on in the future, because I'm telling you, I do run into many men that through many steroid cycles, especially the ones who run Tren. Tren is a huge culprit of truly shutting down your intratesticular testosterone, shutting you down long term, and frankly causing testicular atrophy in men. But I've talked to many men that have really lost a lot of testicular size, and that comes with its own issues down the line. So protect yourself, run HCG. I'll be talking about this more in the future, but I hope this kind of gave you a little bit of insight. If it did, please go ahead and smash that like button, hit subscribe if you haven't already, leave any comments, questions down below. All glory to God. God bless you, and have a great rest of your day.